Chapter 5 Double O Nothing. For the 100th time, Alex cursed Alan Blunt using a language he hadn't even realized he knew. It was almost 5 o'clock in the evening, although it could have been 5 o'clock in the morning. The sky had barely changed at all throughout the day. It was grey, cold, unforgiving. The rain was still falling, a thin drizzle that travelled horizontally in the wind, soaking through his supposedly waterproof clothing, mixing with his sweat and his dirt, chilling him to the bone. He unfolded his map and checked his position once again. He had to be close to the last RV of the day, the last rendezvous point, but he could see nothing. He was standing on a narrow track made up of loose grey shingle that crunched under his combat boots when he walked. The track snaked round the side of the mountain with a sheer drop to the right. He was somewhere in the Brecon Beacons, and there should have been a view, but it had been wiped out by the rain and the fading light. A few trees twisted out of the side of the hill, with leaves as hard as thorns. Behind him, below him, ahead of him, it was all the same, nowhere land. Alex hurt. The 10-kilogram Bergen rucksack he had been forced to wear cut into his shoulders and had rubbed blisters on his back. His right knee, where he had fallen earlier in the day, was no longer bleeding, but still stung. His shoulder was bruised and there was a gash along the side of his neck. His camouflage outfit, he had swapped his Gap combat trousers for the real thing, fitted him badly, cutting his legs and under his arms, but hanging loose everywhere else. He was close to exhaustion, he knew, almost too tired to feel how much pain he was in. But for the glucose and caffeine tablets in his survival pack, he would have ground to a halt hours ago. He knew that if he didn't find the RV soon, he would be physically unable to continue. Then he would be thrown off the course, binned as they called it. They would like that. Swallowing down the taste of defeat, Alex folded the map and forced himself on. It was his 9th, or maybe his 10th day of training. Time had begun to dissolve into itself, as shapeless as the rain. After his lunch with Alan Blunt and Mrs. Jones, he had been moved out of the manor house and into a crude wooden hut in the training camp a few miles away. There were 9 huts in total, each equipped with 4 metal beds and 4 metal lockers. A 5th had been squeezed into one of them to accommodate Alex. 2 more huts, painted a different colour, stood side by side. One of these was a kitchen and mess hall. The other contained toilets, sinks, and showers, with not a single hot tap in sight. On his first day there, Alex had been introduced to his training officer, an incredibly fit black sergeant. He was the sort of man who thought he'd seen everything, until he saw Alex. And he had examined the new arrival for a long minute before he had spoken. "It's not my job to ask questions," he had said, "but if it was, I want to know what they're thinking of, sending me children. Do you have any idea where you are, boy? This isn't Center Parks. This isn't Club Mediterranee." He cut the word into its 5 syllables and spat them out. "I have you for 11 days, and they expect me to give you the sort of training that should take 14 weeks. That's not just mad, that's suicidal." "I didn't ask to be here," Alex had said. Suddenly, the sergeant was furious. "You don't speak to me unless I give you permission," he shouted. "And when you speak to me, you address me as sir. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Alex had already decided that the man was even worse than his geography teacher. "There are 5 units operational here at the moment," the officer went on. "You'll join K unit. We don't use names. I have no name. You have no name. If anyone asks you what you're doing, you tell them nothing. Some of the men may be hard on you. Some of them may resent you being here. That's too bad. You'll just have to live with it. And there's something else you need to know. I can make allowance for you. You're a boy, not a man. But if you complain, you'll be binned. If you cry, you'll be binned. If you can't keep up, you'll be binned. Between you and me, boy, this is a mistake, and I want to bin you. After that, Alex joined K Unit. As the sergeant had predicted, they weren't exactly overjoyed to see him. There were 4 of them. As Alex was soon to discover, the Special Operations Division of MI6 sent its agents to the same training center used by the Special Air Service, the SAS. Much of the training was based on SAS methods, and this included the numbers and makeup of each team. So there were 4 men, each with their own special skills, and 1 boy, seemingly with none. They were all in their mid-20s, spread out over the bunks in companionable silence. 2 of them smoking, 1 dismantling and reassembling his gun, a 9mm Browning high-power pistol. Each of them had been given a code name: Wolf, Fox, Eagle, and Snake. From now on, Alex would be known as Cub. The leader, Wolf, was the one with the gun. He was short and muscular, with square shoulders and black, close-cropped hair. He had a handsome face, made slightly uneven by his nose, which had been broken at some time in the past. He was the first to speak. Putting the gun down, he examined Alex with cold, dark grey eyes. "So, who the hell do you think you are?" he demanded. "Cub," Alex replied. "A bloody schoolboy." Wolf spoke with a strange, slightly foreign accent. "I don't believe it. Are you with Special Operations?" "I'm not allowed to tell you that." Alex went over to his bunk and sat down. The mattress felt as solid as the frame. Despite the cold, there was only 1 blanket. Wolf shook his head and smiled humorously. "Look what they've sent us," he muttered. 007, 00 nothing more like. After that, the name stuck. 00 nothing was what they called him. In the days that followed, Alex shadowed the group, not quite part of it, but never far away. Almost everything they did, he did. He learned map reading, radio communication, and first aid. He took part in an unarmed combat class and was knocked to the ground so often that it took all his nerve to persuade himself to get up again. Then there was the assault course. 5 times he was shouted and bullied across the nightmare of nets and ladders, tunnels and ditches, swinging tightropes and towering walls that stretched for almost half a kilometre through and over the woodland beside the huts. Alex thought of it as the adventure playground from hell. The first time he tried it, he fell off a rope and into a pit that seemed to have been filled on purpose with freezing slime. Half drowned and filthy, he had been sent back to the start by the sergeant. Alex thought he would never get to the end, but the second time he finished it in 25 minutes, which he cut to 17 minutes by the end of the week. Bruised and exhausted though he was quietly pleased with himself. Even Wolf only managed it in 12. Wolf remained actively hostile towards Alex. The other 3 men simply ignored him, but Wolf did everything he could to taunt or humiliate him. It was as if Alex had somehow insulted him by being placed in the group. Once, crawling under the nets, Wolf lashed out with his foot, missing Alex's face by a centimetre. Of course, he would have said it was an accident if the boot had connected. Another time he was more successful, tripping Alex up in the mess hall and sending him flying, along with his tray, cutlery, and steaming plate of stew. And every time he spoke to Alex, he used the same sneering tone of voice. Good night, double or nothing. Don't wet the bed. Alex bit his lip and said nothing. But he was glad when the 4 men were sent off for a day's jungle survival course. This wasn't part of his own training, even though the sergeant worked him twice as hard once they were gone. He preferred to be on his own. But on the 8th day, Wolf did come close to finishing him altogether. It happened in the killing house. The killing house was a fake, a mock-up of an embassy used to train the SAS in the art of hostage release. Alex had twice watched K-Unit go into the house, the first time swinging down from the roof, and had followed their progress on CCTV. All 4 men were armed. Alex himself didn't take part because someone somewhere had decided he shouldn't carry a gun. Inside the killing house, mannequins had been arranged as terrorists and hostages. Smashing down the doors and using stun grenades to clear the rooms with deafening multiple blasts, Wolf, Fox, Eagle, and Snake had successfully completed their mission both times. This time, Alex had joined them. The killing house had been booby-trapped. They weren't told how. All 5 of them were unarmed. Their job was simply to get from one end of the house to the other without being killed. They almost made it. In the first room, made up to look like a huge dining room, they found the pressure pads under the carpet and the infrared beams across the doors. For Alex, it was an eerie experience, tiptoeing behind the other 4 men, watching as they dismantled the 2 devices, using cigarette smoke to expose the otherwise invisible beams. It was strange to be afraid of everything and yet see nothing. In the hallway, there was a motion detector which would have activated a machine gun. Alex assumed it was loaded with blanks, behind a Japanese screen. The 3rd room was empty. The 4th was a living room with the exit, a set of French windows, on the other side. There was a tripwire, barely thicker than a human hair, running the entire width of the room, and the French windows were alarmed. While Snake dealt with the alarm, Fox and Eagle prepared to neutralize the tripwire, unclipping an electronic circuit board and a variety of tools from their belts. Wolf stopped them. "Leave it. We're out of here." At the same moment, Snake signaled. He had deactivated the alarm. The French windows were open. Snake was the first out, then Fox and Eagle. Alex would have been the last to leave the room, but just as he reached the exit, he found Wolf blocking his way. "Tough luck, double or nothing," Wolf said. His voice was soft, almost kind. The next thing Alex knew, the heel of Wolf's palm had rammed into his chest, pushing him back with astonishing force. Taken by surprise, he lost his balance and fell, remembered the tripwire, and tried to twist his body to avoid it. But it was hopeless. His flailing left hand caught the wire. He actually felt it against his wrist. He hit the floor, pulling the wire with him, and then... The HRT stun grenade has been used frequently by the SAS. It's a small device filled with a mixture of magnesium powder and mercury fulminate. When the tripwire activated the grenade, the mercury exploded at once, not just deafening Alex, but shuddering through him as if it could rip out his heart. At the same time, the magnesium ignited and burned for a full 10 seconds. The light was so blinding that even closing his eyes made no difference. Alex lay there with his face against the hard wooden floor, his hands scrabbling against his head, unable to move, waiting for it to end. But even then it wasn't over. When the magnesium had finally burned out, it was as if all the light had burned out with it. Alex stumbled to his feet, unable to see or hear, not even sure anymore where he was. He felt sick to his stomach. The room swayed around him. The heavy smell of chemicals hung in the air. 10 minutes later, he staggered out into the open. Wolf was waiting for him with the others, his face blank, and Alex realized he must have slipped out before he'd hit the ground. An angry sergeant walked over to him. Alex hadn't expected to see a shred of concern in the man's face, and he wasn't disappointed. "Do you want to tell me what happened in there, cub?" he demanded. When Alex didn't answer, he went on, "You ruined the exercise. You fouled up. You could get the whole unit binned, so you'd better start telling me what went wrong." Alex glanced at Wolf. Wolf looked the other way. What should he say? Should he even try to tell the truth? "Well?" The sergeant was waiting. "Nothing happened, sir," Alex said. "I just wasn't looking where I was going. I stepped on something and there was an explosion." "If that was real life, you'd be dead," the sergeant said. "What did I tell you? Sending me a child was a mistake, and a stupid, clumsy child who doesn't look where he's going. That's even worse." Alex stood where he was, just taking it. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see Wolf half smiling. The sergeant had seen it too. "You think it's so funny, Wolf? You can go and clean up in there. And tonight you better get some rest, all of you, because tomorrow you've got a 40-kilometer hike. Survival rations, no fire. This is a survival course, and if you do survive, then maybe you'll have a reason to smile." Alex remembered the words now, exactly 24 hours later. He had spent the last 11 of them on his feet, following the trail the sergeant had set out for him on the map. The exercise had begun at 6 o'clock in the morning after a grey-lit breakfast of sausages and beans. Wolf and the others had disappeared into the distance ahead of him a long time ago. Even though they had been given 25-kilogram rucksacks to carry, they had also been given only 8 hours to complete the course. Allowing for his age, Alex had been given 12. He rounded a corner, his feet scrunching on the gravel. There was someone standing ahead of him. It was the sergeant. He had just lit a cigarette, and Alex watched him slide the matches back into his pocket. Seeing him there brought back the shame and the anger of the day before, and at the same time sapped the last of his strength. Suddenly, Alex had had enough of Blunt, Mrs. Jones, Wolf, the whole stupid thing. With a final effort, he stumbled the last 100 meters and came to a halt. Rain and sweat trickled down the side of his face. His hair, now dark with grime, was glued across his forehead. The sergeant looked at his watch. 11 hours, 5 minutes. That's not bad, cub. But the others were here 3 hours ago. Bully for them, Alex thought. He didn't say anything. Anyway, you should just make it to the last RV, the sergeant went on. It's up there. He pointed to a wall. Not a sloping wall, a sheer one. Solid rock rising 50 meters up without a handhold or a foothold in sight. Even looking at it, Alex felt his stomach shrink. Ian Ryder had taken him climbing, in Scotland, in France, all over Europe. But he had never attempted anything as difficult as this. Not on his own, not when he was so tired. "I can't," he said. In the end, the 2 words came out easily. "I didn't hear that," the sergeant said. "I said I can't do it, sir." "Can't isn't a word we use around here." "I don't care. I've had enough. I've just had—" Alex's voice cracked. He didn't trust himself to go on. He stood there, cold and empty, waiting for the axe to fall. But it didn't. The sergeant gazed at him for a long minute. He nodded his head slowly. "Listen to me, cub," he said. "I know what happened in the killing house." Alex glanced up. "Wolf forgot about the CCTV. We've got it all on film." "Then why—" "Did you make a complaint against him, cub?" "No, sir." Do you want me to make a complaint against him, cub? A pause. Then, no, sir. Good. The sergeant pointed at the rock face, suggesting a path up with his finger. It's not as difficult as it looks, he said, and they're waiting for you just over the top. You've got a nice cold dinner, survival rations. You don't want to miss that. Alex drew a deep breath and started forward. As he passed the sergeant, he stumbled and put out a hand to steady himself, brushing against him. Sorry, sir, he said. It took him 20 minutes to reach the top, and sure enough, K-Unit was already there, crouching around 3 small tents that they must have pitched earlier in the afternoon. 2 for 2 men sharing, 1, the smallest, for Alex. Snake, a thin, fair-haired man who spoke with a Scottish accent, looked up at Alex. He had a tin of cold stew in one hand, a teaspoon in the other. I didn't think you'd make it, he said. Alex couldn't help but notice a certain warmth in the man's voice. And for the first time, he hadn't called him 00 Nor did I, Alex said. Wolf was squatting over what he hoped would become a campfire, trying to get it started with 2 flints while Fox and Eagle watched. He was getting nowhere. The stones only produced the smallest of sparks, and the scraps of newspaper and leaves that he had collected were already far too wet. Wolf struck at the stones again and again. The others watched, their faces glum. Alex held out the box of matches that he had pickpocketed from the sergeant when he had pretended to stumble at the foot of the rock face. These might help, he said. He threw the matches down, then went into his tent.